And welcome to what's today, the April meeting of VOWDA. Thank you so much first to Chris and the Port Authority for hosting us here at this nice facility. So why don't we start with a quick round of introductions. So I'm Will Fadu with the Virginia Maritime Association.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Chris Gullickson with the Virginia Port Authority.
Brian Stevens, Hampton Roads Chamber.
Ashley McLeod. Renewables.
Ben German, Virginia Energy.
Howard Schaeferman, the Haswell Group.
Eileen Wall, Sierra Club.
Brian Welsh, Virginia Energy.
Al Christopher, Virginia Energy.
Excellent. And our guests in the room.
Matt Smith with the Hampton Roads Alliance.
Jennifer Callistrate with Grove.
Excellent. And online, I'm going to call out the names just to make it easier, starting with Laura.
Laura McKay, Virginia CZM program.
Thank you. Kathy.
Kathy Owens, Beach Development Group.
Okay. Zach.
Zach Lemaster with Gentry Law Consulting.
Thank you. Todd.
Yeah, Todd Janeski, Virginia Commonwealth University, contractor to both Virginia CZM and Virginia Marine Resources Commission.
Okay, thank you. And what's the last one? Sean? I can't read it.
It disappeared. So
Oh, disappeared. Okay.
Wrong number.
All right, as a reminder to everyone, this meeting is recorded. Before we get going, we need to vote on virtual participation as per our bylaws. So Jim, one of our board members, has an excused absence today due to a conflict out of town. We also have two members online, Laura McKay and Kathy Owen, who are joining us remotely. As per the bylaws, they have requested permission to attend remotely. One, Laura McKay has a scheduling conflict up in Richmond, and Kathy Owen is also on a business trip out in another part of the country. So I've approved those excuses, or not excuses, but explanations. Let's call explanations, right? So they're more polite word. But we need to vote in order to allow them to participate virtually. So can I get a motion?
So moved.
Okay, seconded.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of allowing their virtual participation, say aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, perfect. It is approved that Laura and Kathy can participate remotely in the VOWDA meeting. Al, did I miss anything with that?
Not, sir.
Okay, so next thing on the agenda, I'd like to get a motion to approve the previous meeting's minutes. Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes from the previous meeting?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved from the previous meeting. Okay, what we were going to do today, I really wanted to focus on two main things, and we'll flip the agenda a little bit. So we've talked the last few meetings about, we've nailed down our annual report from 2022, and then we began work on our 2023 work plan. And thanks to a lot of the hard work of the team here, I think we came up with a pretty good way ahead as far as some action items based on the 2022 report recommendations for VOWDA to attempt to execute in 2023. So I really wanted to make sure we were all on the same page there. Last meeting, we identified some key objectives, and I think there was 6 of them that we came up with, or 6 action items. And we talked about breaking them into different buckets and the different team members that would volunteer to lead those efforts. That being said, I know recently the governor's office created a governor's offshore wind coordination team, which has its own internal purposes for how to coordinate for Virginia and how to best win in the offshore wind space. So we've had some dialogue, Al and I, and also Deputy Secretary Chelsea Jenkins and I, about what that group is, how it will function and operate. And at the end of the day, what's important to this group is how VOWDA will be complementary and how the two groups kind of work together in different ways. So we are going to have a presentation on that. It might be a few minutes. I'm waiting for one of our guests to join us to talk through that. Al, is there anything you want to touch on? I mean, I don't want to dive into it yet, but as or do we want to save it?
No, I think we should save it because we'll hear something directly from the governor's office, somebody in the secretariat.
Okay, sounds good. So what I'll do is I'm going to flip the two items and really focus on the way ahead. And I wanted to dedicate the majority of our meeting today to that so that my goal is that we leave this meeting as VOWDA with a clear idea of what we're trying to accomplish and who's going to take the lead and who's going to help each other. We did go round and round, as you recall, with the Attorney General office and how we were to conduct working groups, meetings, et cetera. I'm not going to belabor that, but long story short, we looked at a lot of alternatives and essentially the way they prescribed it before with public meetings and notices, that's the way it's going to be. So be it. We're going to make it work. And we're still figuring out then how the working groups here are going to work with this governor's offshore wind coordination team, but also some elements that, Kathy Owen's going to share with us in a second of how she approached one of the action items, which I really liked, was essentially a sole contributor. Kathy did a lot of fantastic work as a VOWDA member, going out and getting some feedback to bring recommendations back to this board. So I think that's probably going to wind up to be another useful tool on how we can work through our items. So what I'm going to do is I really want to first just refresh everyone. This is in your packet, what we talked about back in November of the different work plan items, if you will. So the first one, which is continue to support the current CVOW project and Kitty Hawk projects and other future projects through public meetings, comments on BOEM documents and reports, facilitating resolution of potential use conflicts, and working towards meeting the offshore wind goals of the Clean Economy Act. Okay. Ashley's going to brief out a great opportunity closer to the end of the meeting on how we can support that, a great example. But that is kind of an ongoing item that we all continue to do. So that one's not a heavy lift. Item number 2, which is I call support the supply chain. So the first one I called support projects. Okay. Second one, support the supply chain. So continue to work with all the stakeholders to create a regional supply chain for CVOW and Kitty Hawk and other projects, working with, the different developers as well as their contractors, Siemens Gamesa, BEDP, Port Authority, VMA, other manufacturers, et cetera, to promote Virginia companies as part of the supply chain for offshore wind. Okay. So again, that is something that Chris and Brian discussed spearheading. And the great news is a lot of this work is already being done. So work between the VMA, the Alliance, the Port Authority, the Business Network for Offshore Wind, the Chamber, et cetera. There's lots of groups already doing this work. And so for us, it's kind of just keeping an eye on making sure that that we're really maximizing on that potential. Third one, I'll call support R&D. And Kathy's the lead on this one. And she's going to give a presentation on this. Actively solicit research and development opportunities and activities to reduce the cost and risk of developing wind resources in the supply chain, including leveraging the CVOW project and other uses of the Virginia Energy Research Lease in conformance with existing agreements. And I'll let you read the rest about working with different colleges and universities. So we'll come back to that because Kathy has a good presentation on that. So again, support for R&D. Action item 4, if you will, I call this support PPAs. Now, this is going to be one that it's going to need some effort. So continue to work with and to identify possible power offtake agreements in the Commonwealth and elsewhere, such as utilities, military installations, large data companies with clean energy commitments, such as Amazon, et cetera. So Howard has volunteered to help spearhead that one. I'll make a short comment that's consistent with other things that we have communicated to the administration to date, is a path to market has been repeatedly identified as an inhibitor for developers coming and either setting up shop in this area or bidding on projects. And a lot of that ties into how they're going to sell power, whether that's going to be a PPA agreement with a major utility or connecting to the PJM market or other type of private PPAs. So that is something, just go ahead and earmark that, or just note we're going to need to do some work there. Item 5, I call this one support jobs. So support workforce development, create more jobs in the Mid-Atlantic region, bring clean energy to the tri-state grid, and bring positive benefits to disadvantaged coastal communities. So Eileen has volunteered to spearhead this one to make sure that of all the economic development opportunities we're bringing here and projects, that we're also correlating that with jobs and making sure that those jobs are staying in the Mid-Atlantic region as well. And finally, the 6th item, I call this support more lease areas without harm. What I mean here is essentially a lot of the work that I do, for example, at the trade association in partnership with others, is ensuring that as BOEM continues to or gets ready to put out this next wave of wind energy areas in Q1 24, that those have all been deconflicted with other users such as DoD, commercial maritime, NASA operations, fisheries, etc. So that's pretty much also in a good place. I think this summer is when we're supposed to see kind of that final rendition of the wind energy areas before they go out to auction. So that was a very brief summary. I'll pause for a second if there's just any questions before I turn it over to Kathy.
Where does floating offshore wind fit in as far as just getting a handle on the prospects of that coming in the supply chain located in Virginia Beach or in Hampton Roads?
Sure. Great question. I think it fits into all of them because so far we're not delineating between, projects being or turbines being put in the seafloor or floating. So that would be split amongst all those groups.
Okay. Good answer.
Okay. So let me tell you, I'm going to try to tee up Kathy, but then I'm going to get out of her way. I think what Kathy's going to present and kind of how she approached this action item that she's leading will probably serve as a really good suggested template or way of tackling some of these other items. So Kathy volunteered to take on the R&D work item of basically how to maximize those opportunities. Really went out, interviewed a lot of experts, came back with a plan, did a SWOT analysis, and is prepared today to basically say, all right, this is what I did. This is what I think we should do. I thought that was a good approach. Hopefully you all agree on how we can model us handling other action items. So Kathy, I'd like to turn it over to you, if that's okay, to give your presentation.
Okay, great. Is that going to be up on your screen?
I don't know if we have that teed up. Are you able to share screen?
I think so. Let's see. All right, how about that? Can you guys see it?
Yep, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, let me get,
If you want to put it in presenter mode, it'll probably show up clear.
here we go. Okay, again, this is an overview. It's just a sample of what this could look like, and it's a very big overview, a 60,000 foot view of this objective and action. So it's more about the action because the objective is written quite broadly. And so I'm focusing on the action, and then at the end, you'll see, one of the recommendations is to possibly update the wording of the action. So, here's the code of where VOWDA falls now after 2021, where the General Assembly moved some things around in code, and this is where it falls. So under the charter for VOWDA, this objective and action falls under this first charter point of collecting mid-ocean environmental data. Not there we go. So objective A is what Will has already read. The action is, so we have objective A is again being very broadly written. The action is more defined and in my opinion, constructive. So it's actively solicit research and development opportunities and activities to reduce the cost and risk of developing wind resources and the supply chain. So in that means this was really, set up when VOWDA was in 2010, and it served its purpose then for sure. But right now, I've looked at, pulled that apart, seen what's been done kind of since then, and where we are today with that action. And so the strengths are, of course, the approved research lease area, current approved and funded research projects, which are all under Dominion now. They manage and take all of the unsolicited research projects right now. Future approved research projects which they have approved, and those entities are awaiting funding. The VCIRC is a strength, VOWDA charter is a strength, and you'll see I have the NOWRDC in all four squares because it can be all four: a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, and a threat as well. So I'm trying to move this thing around. There we go. All right. So strengths and weaknesses are internal. When you look at a SWOT, if some folks are not familiar with the SWOT, strengths and weaknesses are internal to the organization, and opportunities or threats are external. So the weaknesses of this action is there's constraints in the lease agreement for collecting research fees between both DMME and BOEM and Dominion and DMME, lack of published research project and funding opportunities, lack of centralized location for research requests, solicitations, and opportunities, lack of state funding opportunities for research projects, constraints on the use of the turbines for research projects because they are already now in operation, unachieved research deliverables from a DMME ODU MOU, which we'll go over in a little bit, unrealized benefits from membership in the NORW, I'm just going to call it the RDC, and no strategy to acquire new lease areas for Virginia. So the opportunities, there's quite a few opportunities out there for this action. The membership, again, in the RDC can be an opportunity. Federal funding programs for offshore wind, the DME ODU MOU, which is still has not been terminated, so it has no, it's open-ended. The benefits of memberships to other offshore wind research organizations, existing and underdeveloped collaborative public access platforms, state offshore wind research funding support, collaboration with other research organizations, national policy involvement, and can't get down to the bottom one. I can't do that with my screen, so I've got something else in the way. And then threats. We've got, again, RDC could be a threat. And these other organizations and programs in other states that are offering grants and funding for for research. Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and their program Power US, that program in New York, New Jersey, all these initiatives in these other states that are offering grants and other types of funding for research throughout their states. And then of course, third-party developers bidding on new lease areas off our own coast. Oh, there it is. There we go. New Atlantic coast lease areas. That was the other opportunity. There we go. All right. So summary, bottom line up front is the key result of this action is to reduce the costs and risk of developing wind resources and the supply chain. Since the acquisition of the research lease area was completed, there's been no activity regarding this action, primarily due to the lack of funding available to carry out the scope of the DMME ODU MOU, which charges ODU with developing and managing the activities listed in this action. So I do have a copy of that MOU, and it basically outlines most of the actions in this particular action under this objective. It also covers several other objective actions in our in the VOWDA scope. And it was it's and I'll go over that next of where that is with that. But in general, the VOWDA charter was established in 2010, and it's complete. And as Al has mentioned, it has it served its purpose well by providing the single largest contributor to the lowering of the costs of the risks of development. By helping the agency acquire the first offshore renewable energy research lease awarded by BOEM. That was solely the actions of DMME and VOWDA working together. Since then, DMME and ODU executed an MOU establishing a scope that carried out, again, this objective and many more objectives in our charter. The funding included in the initial contract awarded under the MOU was insufficient, though, to complete the entire scope of work, and additional funding was not received. So therefore, the action has been dormant, and Dominion, as the developer, has self-funded a lot of the research and surveys required for their own permits, and they are the only one processing and managing all solicited third-party research proposals independently. So I've highlighted underneath here a cut and paste out of the actual MOU where it establishes ODU as the principal investigator, taking the lead and responding to offshore wind research proposal solicitations and blah, blah, blah. You can kind of see the rest of that. So summary of this is the permits for the research area contain terms required by BOEM, which may or may not affect some research projects and funding of research projects and reduction of costs. The Dominion Energy's test turbines have become operational now, making it more difficult to attach any type of research to the turbines themselves. The RDC was established in 2018. It received funding initially from the state of New York and from the Department of Energy. Virginia was one of the first members to it and committed $1 million towards this organization, which also entitled Virginia to a seat on the board. So far, they were awarded about $31 million. 16 of it has gone to the state of New York. And companies and research entities in New York. They have fact sheets for every state. It's showing Virginia having received $5 million, but if you look at each of those, very few of them are direct funds. They are subcontracts under other funding that mostly has come out of the University of Maine. So it's kind of it's not very transparent when you look at the fact sheets. It kind of looks good on paper but when you start digging into the weeds a little bit, you'll see that there's many of the projects overlap. So some of the funding that shows is going to Virginia is actually also going to other states. So that's why I would consider this RDC a threat, an opportunity, a weakness, and a strength. It all depends on how Virginia chooses to leverage their membership in this organization or continue their membership, because now there's many more states now. So you kind of have to look at whether is there a finite pie of funding that now has to be divided up between more members, or is it unlimited funding that we could leverage our membership and get more positive outcomes for funding for Virginia. Another, oops, wrong way. So another, oh, there we go. I need a better assistant. And another interesting factoid was once, I started researching other states that don't even have projects yet actually are very far ahead of Virginia as far as offering different types of funding and promotion of research within their states. Next, there are existing collaborative platforms and organizations so that this action doesn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. There's some that already exist that could be looked at as potential collaborative partners for this action. So the recommendations for this, and this is just something that I've developed. This is purely for discussion for the group, and this is just what from my summary, from my research. These are just some of the actions that VOWDA could take instead of just supporting these. These would actually be actions that we would take as showing that support. When we support this, we support this. These are actions that we would take to support, and then determining out of which ones of these would be something to recommend as a budget item or legislative action. So revising the objective actions by updating the language, and I think that would apply to probably all of our actions for our objectives, is kind of updating them from when they were written, over a decade ago. For example, change reduce costs and risk of developing offshore wind to something more. This you see throughout the industry now is reduce levelized costs of energy of offshore wind while maximizing economic and environmental benefits. And then include innovation in our research activities. This particular activity focuses on environmental, which is important. There's a lot of groups out there doing environmental, and my recommendation would be to include innovation in those research activities as well. Next, determine the types and topics of research that are pertinent to future offshore wind development. Create and prioritize those types, research project types and topics. Establish a state grant and funding program for offshore wind research projects. And when I say research, it includes data collection and other activities, which is what the objective, that's the wording in the objective. Next, identify and appoint an entity. It's very similar to the MOU that appoints ODU as kind of the mothership for this. It's and whether it remains them, whether that MOU is used as continuing as a vehicle for that, or whether a new one is more appropriate. It's to identify and appoint an entity to establish a central and publicly accessible location to promote research and project funding opportunities, accept and process all research project requests, create research project solicitations, and manage research projects. Next, compile a list of the BOEM permit constraints so that researchers can come to this platform, understand what can and cannot be done in these lease areas. Identify a fee structure and means of collection for fees in accordance with the lease permit and terms. So they may be restricted as far as paying to use something, but there may be opportunities of administrative fees that fall outside of those terms that may end up, helping to decrease the cost of the research lease area. Next, determine the value of future membership in the RDC. If it's maintained, leverage the membership to achieve better research project funding outcomes for Virginia. Join and leverage memberships in other offshore wind organizations such as ROSA, VOWDA, and the RWSC, which is doing a lot of projects, research, promoting the same thing that this activity calls for. Next, collaborate on research projects and ensure alignment of the policies and priorities with Virginia interests. Utilize current and future data and research findings to boost acquisition of the new offshore wind lease areas for Virginia. and create and issue a white paper by June with recommended VOWDA actions, staff actions, budget items, and legislative actions. So those the end of the recommendations. There are my sources, and that's it. Pretty picture.
Excellent. Well, Kathy, thank you so much. I thought that was pretty good. And what I'd like to do is just pause and open it up for any questions from the group for Kathy. I mean, to be clear, we're not voting on anything today, but this is like a good,
Lot of information to digest.
right, but this is like an approach, I think, of like, anyway, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I just want some clarity as far as what's research project, the definition of research project. One research project that I would be interested in is a gap analysis, workforce gap analysis, as far as offshore wind jobs are involved. So is that an element of a research project, or is this limited to more the actual construction of turbines and the technology?
That's a great question, Eileen. If you look back at the objective, the objective is written so broadly that it would cover that. And again, the action item, I would recommend that it be written to more align with the objective, because the objective is written very broadly, and the objective actually, if I can, let me go back to that. Uh-oh.
Escape first.
There we go. Okay, the objective is relevant data needed by stakeholders, and that would be data. It's very, very broad. So I think any type of research, data collection, studies would fall under this.
Any other questions?
Are you moving towards having sort of like a compilation of all the research needs? Whether or not it gets funded or materializes in any way, but just identifying all the research needs that we might have?
Yeah, I think that was one of the recommendations is VOWDA, and maybe with help from other stakeholders, is listing their priorities, listing what kind of research, what kind of data, what kind of studies are needed, and then prioritize them. And then work with either the budget or legislative action to create a funding mechanism.
Just an observation, and thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. And I think it's both the need and then the current output. And I think you hit on something there with, different outside parties utilizing the research turbines to conduct studies that maybe Virginia universities aren't participating or are not involved with. And so that's actually a question that I was asked yesterday and was sort of flat-footed, not being able to respond directly on what is underway. And boy, what an advantage for Virginia to have the two first, to have research turbines in our waters or off our coast and not be capitalizing. So I think it's a very important thing to have in the work plan, an important objective. And I think that is something when you look at what an output could be from VOWDA, being able to articulate and to show a pathway to some research opportunities could be a value benefit, not just to ODU, but to other institutions here in Virginia. So just again, observation. The money's out there, and you hear the headlines. You see New York and NYSERDA and places north of here capturing a lot of research dollars. There is something here for us in Virginia, I think. So,
Laura, you got a question?
Yeah, and sorry, right
Yeah.
now, the research universities are contacting Dominion directly, and Dominion's vetting those projects and approving them. One other item that I put in the recommendations is actually as including innovation as well. And there's a couple of there are opportunities available. There's a stress strain project, a study going on right now on the base of one of the turbines that was allowable. Dominion did allow that, but again, you have to call Dominion and say what's going on there. And they're not actively soliciting anything. But if you go and look at some of the other states, Maine, New Jersey, New York, they're actively promoting research within their states, and they don't even have a project yet. So we are behind in that. And that, you know, one of the items in the action was to create a platform which does not exist. Open Seas is a possibility to collaborate with for that. Aerial is something in development that's a possibility to collaborate with. Some of the environmental research is already being done by RWDC, and that could be another collaborative effort. Not you know, just having a link to that, because they're already, you know, doing a lot of the environmental and oceanic studies and research.
Thanks, Kathy. Laura, you have a question.
Well, just a comment more. I think it is kind of a question in my mind, to what extent VOWDA wants to get involved in the larger ocean planning types of issues. And yeah, what kind of research does VOWDA want to focus on? Because there is a whole world of work going on with the environmental aspects and general ocean planning aspects. So it's kind of hard to figure out where VOWDA wants to set boundaries around that. But I would say that the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative is an organization that's relatively new, but they're developing quite an extensive portfolio of research needs and gaps. And they are actually receiving millions of dollars of funding very soon from some developers to carry out that research. And so Virginia needs to stay plugged into that. I am involved with that, but you know, one person in Virginia is not enough. And then there's also a parallel organization, ROSA, the Regional Offshore Science Alliance, that's focusing on offshore wind impacts to fisheries. The other organization, the Wildlife Science Collaborative, is all the other wildlife in the ocean, and looking at research needs in terms of potential impacts from offshore wind to those animals. So, you know, what would be great is if, I mean, we don't want to recreate those wheels in VOWDA, but maybe there needs to be a stronger connection between VOWDA and ROSA and the RWSC, so that we in VOWDA, you know, are understanding what those research needs are, and also getting our Virginia specific needs raised to those organizations. And I think, I mean, that's a lot of work. And I think, as you all know, I'm going to be retiring July 20th. We
So
are
you'll
going
have
to
more time to do this. Fantastic.
Yeah, I might need to volunteer to help out some. But yeah, there's a lot going on. And of course, the Marcos Ocean Data Portal. I hope everyone is aware of that and using it. I know a lot of you are. But Kathy, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a place where there is just a ton of information about offshore wind. All of the lease areas and everything are on there. All of the AIS shipping data are on there. All of the marine wildlife information is on there. Other human uses. So, as some of you know too, I've been struggling to develop a Virginia ocean plan and trying to figure out, you know, do we have high level support in Virginia for moving forward with that? But that's a whole nother topic. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks,
and
Laura.
just say it's really a rich area for conversation.
Ashley, did you have a quick comment?
I have a question.
Quick.
Mine is a question. And so Kathy mentioned some dollars here. She mentioned $5 million that have gone into the budget. Is that supervised by the Department of Energy? Who is, and the comment was made that Dominion is the one vetting these research projects. Is that accurate, or is it DMME or Virginia Energy? Sorry, Department of Energy.
Well, let me take the 5 million first.
Okay.
I think you were referring to Kathy's comments that on the Now RDC website, it shows that there are $5 million that are somehow associated with Virginia,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
And
Clarify that for us.
well, I can clarify to some extent.
Okay.
Kathy's right that the website is not really clear, but what I think the Now RDC has tried to do is make sure that every state gets back at least the funding they put in. Virginia has exceeded that because we committed to 1 million. We've so far provided 600,000. And one Virginia Tech project is over $1 million. An award from the Now RDC. I don't know about those pieces of the other 3.8 or 9 million. I don't know how or whether Virginia is involved specifically, meaning there's an institution in Virginia that's doing part of the research and getting part of the funding, or is it simply that it's the benefit to the state in particular because of the nature of our projects?
So who is Virginia's representative to Now RDC?
It will become me. It was our agency head. And it'll become our new agency head. But in the interim, I was designated as the interim. The board has met to consider new projects.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this year.
And then back to the question. So we've only basically,
So
we only got the one Virginia Tech research thing is again.
research proposals come in to us, to Dominion. We probably forward at least half of the ones we've received to Dominion because they request use of the pilot turbines. So they want to put something on the tower or in the tower, or they want to mount a piece of a sensor, a LiDAR, or
Right.
On the actual turbines. And so that has to be approved, obviously, by the owner of the project, Dominion. We also
The test turbines, are they owned by Dominion or are they owned by the state of Virginia?
owned by Dominion.
No, the lease area is.
No, the turbines are owned by Dominion. They
The
were
lease there,
paid
okay.
for by the ratepayers.
Okay, so the lease area is owned by Virginia, then the turbines, that's,
We-
clarify that. That's,
we
I think it's
lease-
reasonable to ask
Right,
that.
we lease the ocean bottom
Mhm.
in that area. And-
For the purpose of testing, and Dominion owns the towers that are in that lease area.
Right, they
They own and operate them. Okay,
were our designated operator under the lease. The lease has to have the designated operator. It could have been us, but obviously we didn't have the resources to build 2 6-megawatt turbines. So we designated Dominion as the lease operator. The lease was intended to enable the construction of those turbines. Otherwise, that would have been very difficult, if not impossible.
yeah,
Rhode Island did it, but it wasn't in federal property.
right, it's state waters. Yep.
So that was the main objective of that lease.
Okay.
Was to enable the construction of the 2 turbines. And, there's a long thread of what influenced over the past 15 years, the direction of research by DMME, our formerly known agency, and
The agency formerly known as DMM.
Virginia Energy and others involved in research. It has typically followed 3 things. Federal money, or in the early years of VOWDA, and which is the early years of the offshore wind industry in Virginia. It was all about the federal money. And the federal money initially was going to be to create wind centers. And so we applied for 2 research leases, research lease 1, research lease 2. With that end in mind, that we were trying to create basically an ocean bed research facility where Virginia could bring its universities together and other experts and get this federal funding. Well, the U.S. Department of Energy completely switched gears while we were in the process of submitting both lease applications through the very lengthy bowl review process to turbine technology instead. So they issued a huge amount of funding called the Offshore Wind Technology Advancement Project. And Dominion quickly applied for that funding and named their project after the federal program's namesake, the Virginia Offshore Wind Technology Advancement Project, VOWDA. So we switched gears on the 2 leases. Lease 2 became our high priority, and that's the one that's there now, where the turbines are, the sliver of Albatross directly on the western edge of the commercial wind energy area, so that we would be positioned to get that federal money. And that worked. I can't remember if it was 40 million or 50 million. You remember, Jennifer? It was one of those.
Okay.
Dominion was able to get about 2/3 of that, I recall. Then DOE pulled the plug and said, we're running out of time. We're going to stop funding projects that can't commit to installation by X date. Dominion couldn't do that because SEC approval was required.
Right. Okay.
So, and then it's switched again, but I don't want to keep going.
I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I
take
got
that
to
around,
move
but
on.
yeah.
So thank you. I'm going to
Quick.
cause a pause on all this. Thank you very much. So Kathy, fantastic.
Mhm.
Kathy and I are pretty like-minded, and I know a lot of people in the room too, of this is the kind of stuff we should be doing as far as looking for actionable things for us to do. Because quite frankly, everyone in this room knows what's going on in offshore wind. So when I think about updates and high fives, we don't need that in this committee.
Right.
We need actionable items, and I think Kathy's done a great job kind of showing the way. So I'm going to pause this agenda item for the interest of time, because we do have our next speaker here, Deputy Secretary Jen Wall, is going to talk through really explaining to us now the purpose of the governor's offshore wind coordination team, and how that's going to be complementary to VOWDA. And I know she has a hard stop as well. And Kathy, you're still sharing your screen if you want to pull that down. Thank you. So Jen, thanks for joining us. I understand you have a hard stop, so I want to be respectful of your time and turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. It's good to see so many, I think, familiar faces and names and so many members of our team on here as well. Thank you for letting me join a little late and then obviously leave a little bit early. I appreciate the flexibility. So thank you again for that. For those of you who don't know me, as they mentioned, Jennifer, Jen, whatever you all would like to call me, Deputy Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. Wanted to give you all a very quick kind of update as to how we are working amongst ourselves in the administration and then with outside stakeholders. I know we have worked very closely with all of our agencies. As you all know, we have many of our agencies are represented today on this Zoom. We work together, obviously, within our agencies, but as you all know, this cross-cuts, among multiple secretariats. And the main secretariats, as you all know, that have been involved in this process are obviously the secretariat that I work within, the Natural and Historic Resources group, as well as Commerce and Trade, as well as Finance. So one of the things that we all have been doing is we have obviously internal meetings within our agencies, but then we also have monthly meetings that we all have been hosting. And that, as I said before, kind of cross cuts among the multiple secretariats. So you will have folks from whether it's energy, DEQ, VMRC, most of our agencies. And what we do is obviously we have multiple meetings throughout the month, kind of within our agencies and within our secretariats and with outside stakeholders. And then we come back together for our monthly meetings to kind of share our information, compare notes, make sure we're all kind of moving forward in the right direction and compiling kind of everything that we're hearing as we move forward. I think one of the things that has been so great about our ability to collaborate is, the ability for us to work across the different secretariats and have everybody kind of, sharing the information. For instance, I can see Todd on here and Laura and multiple, our multiple agencies. I think Sharon as well is maybe on here with DEQ. And so, one of the things I think that has been really helpful in moving forward is all of our willingness to make sure, we kind of make sure we're all on the same page with those monthly meetings, and we continue to hold ourselves accountable as we move forward. What I will do, if it's okay with you all, is open it up to kind of any questions, but just wanted to let you all know that we're all, cross-cutting, among the different secretariats.
Thanks, Jen. So I do actually, I've had some great chats with Al, and Al's
Yes.
done a great job trying to explain to me kind of the purpose, because we have VOWDA, right?
Yes.
And Virginia is very blessed that we have lots of groups that have been working on offshore wind for a long time. So a lot of the groups involved in here individually, as well as an unofficial group you've heard of called the Wind Avengers, and then VOWDA as well, right? So
Yes.
lots of groups in Virginia already kind of working on offshore wind and how do we best position Virginia to win in the offshore wind space in the Central Atlantic. And then when I was talking to Chelsea about this formation of now this coordination team, I really wanted you all to come and present today basically how this new coordination team was going to augment, supplement, or vice versa with VOWDA, a formal entity, and others, and how we can not recreate the wheel or be redundant or step on each other's toes, but how do we best work together to achieve the same goal?
And absolutely, I think that's a great question. And we have, I think maybe the other deputy secretary may have joined. I think Chelsea may actually be on, so I'll let her jump in if she has anything else that she would like to make sure that we convey. But I think, to your point, we want to make sure that we are complementing each other, right, as we move forward. To your point, we do not want to recreate the wheel. We want to make sure, I think, that we're all working together. And part of the monthly meetings that we are holding internally is to make sure that, oftentimes you see in government, one agency is going in one direction. You have everybody's working hard within their agencies and even within their secretariats. And I think that's one of the things that we are trying to make sure we're all talking together. But I think making sure we're all on the same page within our entity, but more importantly, able to convey kind of the same message and work with you all and complement everything that you all are doing. And I say that because, to your point, there are multiple entities, right? We're all kind of working on the same issue, but we want to make sure that we're not, to your point, recreating the wheel, reinventing the wheel, or or being divergent, right? And what we're doing, even more importantly, I think. So I think the thought moving forward is by making sure we're all kind of a cohesive team, if you will. And I think everyone has done a fantastic job within our group, and I would tip my hat to the deputy secretary on that, Chelsea, for making sure we're all kind of on the same page. I think the thought is to make sure that we continue to work with you all and all the other entities, obviously, that you mentioned as we move forward, and perhaps have maybe more robust conversations and more opportunities to discuss together to make sure we all are complementing each other as we move forward. I think the thought is, now that we're really meeting, like I said, very regularly, every month, meet with you all as appropriate more often, and make sure we're all kind of, rowing in the same direction. And I think I see Chelsea. Chelsea, are you still there? I don't know if you want to add anything.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. I was actually really excited about joining you all in my hometown. But Yeah, I didn't catch the very beginning. I just hopped on, I think when Deputy Wally started speaking, but I think, you all know last year we were just trying to kind of wrap our arms around more generally from a, more macro view of how are all of these generation assets that are coming online or proposed going to work together holistically to serve the demand load curve that is unlike anything else in the country. I mean, we keep hearing we are the global tip of the spear. The load curve is actually terrifying, and so we were just kind of getting back to the basics, and then this year we started to kind of form internal teams with agencies to tackle some of the challenges and opportunities. Some of you are involved on, the nuclear leadership team we have, and we're launching a hydrogen team and things like that. But you all have been doing great work. You're the subject matter experts. To Deputy Wally's point, it's the governor asked us to break down the silos internally across secretariats and across agencies, and we've only had 3 meetings once a month, and it's really just level setting. And what we realized each month is we need more time. The 1 hour goes quick, and I think I saw Laura on the list. She can attest. We get through maybe 1/10 of what we want to get through every month. So it's clear that there's a lot going on, and we need to kind of dig in deeper and maybe even bifurcate and bring you all in. So I think what we propose, and Will, we chatted about this in Baltimore, is the next monthly meeting. It's the second Tuesday of the month. Is we think we should meet in person and have more of a working meeting and have a few hours together. And I think it would be great if we have your team come and also just educate the various secretariats on all of the great work that you've been doing. And ultimately, we don't want the redundancy. I think it's just agreeing on, especially for this year, is what are the key objectives that we all agree we should focus on together and start swimming in the same direction, and figure out who the owners should be of the various work tasks, and then milestones and deliverables and all of that. And then there's going to be all the things that you're doing that is great and complementary, but I don't know that I hope the fear wasn't that the internal working group was going to replace any of the other activities going on. That's not at all what the purpose was. I think it was just to the earlier point of, the governor said, hey, offshore wind is unique, and then it touches basically every secretariat. And so let's just get our internal house in order and just make sure that, Secretary Cummings from a finance perspective understands all the stuff in commerce and trade and all the stuff in historic and natural resources, and that we are the things that we're learning out there from a commerce and trade perspective that we're sharing with the other secretariats, so that as y'all, everyone goes about their world, they're connecting more dots and coming from a holistic whole of government approach. So I think it will be next month. If you can, I think it's going to be a great level setting, and I think there will be some decisions made, hopefully, on very specific objectives and deliverables for this year.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Jen, for coming as well. I think that was important to me to better understand, and that this group here understands how we can best support this new group as well. But I like the idea. I'll get together with our team and talk about what coming up might look like, and maybe put together a tight slide deck that talks about what the 2022 report look like, what our work plan items for 2023 are, and then also introducing you a little better to the subject matter experts around the room here. And we can do that, I think, in a tight, cohesive way, and then go from there, really. So I'd like to take just a few minutes. Is there any questions?
Because we tend to.
I just would make an observation. Hey, Chelsea, it's Chris. And I just echo, by all means, the impression is to drive, support the development of a new industry here in the Commonwealth that obviously is a tremendous opportunity, and also supporting the Virginia Energy Plan. And so I definitely, Chelsea hit on it. I mean, I think Secretary Cummings really hit on it. It's cultivating outcomes here, and the administration helping support and drive outcomes, which I think VOWDA really feeds in with the knowledge that sits around this table, and even the objectives that are outlined in our work plan to support what is going to be a true win around offshore wind for the I mean, that's not a cliche. I truly can tell you that the momentum's there. We all know that, and the support is coming from the administration to drive this forward.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And just one thing that popped into my head that's an example is, you know, and through the relationship with you all, we were working through our economic growth framework that is kind of whole of government, you know, working across all the secretariats to make sure that the way VEDP and the REDOs and economic developers are going about their day is we're all focused on the same North Star. But, you know, some of the data that came back early from McKinsey on the offshore wind industry, you know, I was thinking these are really low. I'm not quite sure that this is in line with what I'm hearing, right? And so I called some of you, and then as a result, Hampton Roads Alliance was able to develop another study that kind of looked at realistically the Commonwealth of Virginia, knowing what we know today, what are the opportunities that we can win? And then more specifically, to that point that Chris made, how can we support you all and the players in trying to land these deals and grow opportunities and investment and jobs and you know, that we have to have that connectivity, right? We're just trying to understand how to support and help grow the industry. And I think, you know, with the offshore wind amendments, I am so grateful that we were able to kind of get to the point, you know, and Eileen, we talked and then had some calls. And I think the overwhelming support for just signaling to the market, hey, we're open for business, right? We keep talking about we got to crawl before we walk, before we run. And I think often we kind of jump 10 steps ahead, right, before we lay the foundation. And that's also what we're trying to make sure is that we are creating the business environment that companies want to be in. They want to expand and thrive, or they want to come here for the first time. And that's really a lot of our focus.
Eileen, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. Really admire that coordination, because the coordination is really, especially for offshore wind, but we also talked about coordination across workforce development, and it's going to be tricky for you all because offshore workforce development is involved with offshore wind as well. So having those different coordination teams put together and having them also not only put those together to get them better coordinated, but then have them coordinate amongst each other, which, you know, I'm confident that you'll pull it off.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate your questions and concerns when it comes to workforce. We're thinking about it too. And the other thing that we want to make sure, by the way, for the next monthly meeting, second Tuesday in May, is that we have Secretary Slater's team come and also give everyone an overview of the new the transformation when it comes to labor and workforce. And there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening to support better outcomes, because ultimately we want to place these folks into jobs that they really enjoy and thrive in. And so I think that'll be a good discussion too.
I have one simple question. Please make sure that we can actually go to this meeting on the 2nd of Tuesday as a group.
Well, that's what we're talking about. And
You guys can resolve that, but just make sure that it's doable.
okay,
Thank you. That's all.
any response to that? Al, Chelsea?
To say one thing, one quick thing is the purpose and powers of VOWDA have not been used to their full potential. And I think this collaboration will be able to push it to another level and actually be able to use a lot of the powers that were given to this authority by the General Assembly.
That is a really good point. And, we're kind of in a more opposite position when it comes to nuclear, where when we were looking, right, we have an advantage here in Virginia for lots of different reasons. But then when we were looking at all the projects being announced in the hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, Virginia wasn't on the list at all. And so we kind of developed this capture team that has economic VEDP and Virginia Energy and a few secretariats. And then we have the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium and external partners like you all, right? And they have been immensely helpful. Is I can just go to someone externally and say, hey, these are the meetings that we need, or who do we need to connect with? And then it's just so much more efficient, and groups like yours, better than we know. And so we need you. You are the partners that we need for the connectivity and to be able to get all of this done. And we're going to be gone in a few years, and we want all of this to continue. And so I totally agree, and it's working really well with some of the other leadership capture teams we developed. And I think, offshore wind was ahead of some of these other areas that we're working on now to catch up in. And so I think we're honestly trying to catch up with you versus the other way around in some of these other areas.
Excellent. Well, Jen and Chelsea, thank you so much. We can definitely collaborate on setting something up. If I heard you right about having VOWDA come up to the next meeting, and we can communicate offline on, how long, what do you guys want to know, et cetera, and then we can put together something pretty tight to present to you all. I do want to bring up too, that's important. What Kathy mentioned is, if you actually go back and read through kind of the origins of VOWDA and the purposes and the authorities, she's right on. We're severely underutilized, but I think that's great opportunity for us to grow. And I do thank Al and Ken and Ryan and the Virginia Energy team for continuing to give VOWDA the same level of service that it has previously, even with their new responsibilities with the new coordination team. So with that, thank you, Jen and Chelsea, for joining. I understand, Jen, you have to go. You all are more than welcome to stick around as we continue with the rest of the presentation. I also will throw out, this is worth knowing. So after the next meeting, where maybe the two groups get together and coordinate. So Chris, with his role at the Port Authority, is already part of these coordination teams with the cabinet. So I also think in a very efficient way, Chris could be kind of like VOWDA's liaison, since he's participating in those meetings anyway, and then come back and brief back and forth. So just save everybody else some time. Okay. All right. So I want to move back to where we were when we were discussing kind of Kathy's presentation. What I'd like to recommend is, so Kathy, or just Al, you have the PowerPoint, the most recent edition. Send that around to the team. If you have any feedback, any comments, questions, and then the appropriate feedback, I think, is either, send it to Kathy directly. Let's not do any CC alls or anything like that. And then so we can start to have that dialogue, because what I'd like to do maybe as a vision moving forward is some of the items that really need attention, because I'll be frank, I think 4 of these, maybe 3 to 4 of these items do not need detailed attention. They're already well underway, maybe worth a few minutes every meeting to discuss, but there's a few, such as R&D, that do need the deeper dive. So we could set it up where in future meetings, one of the topics that needs attention gets a thorough brief, similar to what Kathy modeled for us today. And then it sets up Q&A, further revision, and then any further action items that need vote would then be teed up for the next meeting. That being said, let me thank Kathy again for kind of being the tip of the spear and showing us this new way for us to actually have some meaningful action items. now I really wanted to have some open discussion. Now that you've heard from the governor's coordination team and kind of what they're doing with offshore wind, you've heard Kathy's presentation on the R&D side, and how we're probably going to wind up integrating in some way with this coordination team. I want to open up the discussion to these working groups and any of the further action items in our work plan that you think need more attention.
Well, I was reading the article that was sent around by Lynn recently about the opportunity for off-takers being pretty much, the next target would be, I assume, Kitty Hawk, because that's open, it's not already wired regulatorily and so forth. And does that seem like an accurate picture? That's really the only near-term thing where we can run around and say, who are the big energy users that are being interested in the Commonwealth, and going from there to try and make sure they understand that they have some really good options to be using green power. Any thoughts on it? Is that article correct in its general focus as being that's where the opportunity is to link future Virginia economic development with offshore wind?
Mhm.
Yes.
I mean, that would seem accurate to me.
So the linkage there, it seems like in some ways is just between VOWDA and the Economic Development Partnership within the state, right? And what they know about the future stream, the pipeline, so to speak, of large energy users that are intrigued by the Commonwealth at the moment, or?
So they should be. I mean, VEDP should be as well as others. And then the developers themselves are going to be already out talking to those people as well. So to your point, Howard, the conduit of bringing everybody together, the connection that way is to, but typically that is happening. But I think that I think probably part of what it is to make sure that we support and recognize that the businesses that are going to come here, how this is an attractive, an incentive as Virginia. If we know that we have reliable, renewable energy, then more businesses are going to want to come. And that's what Chelsea and her whole team are doing as well as part of that. So
I'm just trying to isolate what is the VOWDA role
right
in all of that.
Yeah, I think it's connecting to where most of the developers have communicated to us that, yes, there's the opportunity to connect to PJM, to the wholesale market, but no developer, is what I'm told, is going to be able to finance a project purely on PJM sales.
Sure.
So it really does center around PPAs, right? So Dominion in this case, since they're the utility, they're their own provider, right? So they're buying essentially their own power. So they're PPA, if you will, with themselves. So it's helping other projects that may develop in the near future that need PPAs, and whether that's with the utility or if it's with a large private consumer, so that these projects can actually be financed.
Right.
So that's kind of the nut to crack, and what that looks like from a PPA standpoint. Same thing with it's spelled out in here, whether it's large commercial users, large DoD installations. It's getting these developers the PPAs they need. That's where we are. Eileen.
No way a legislative expert, but isn't there some kind of legislative component that needs to happen as far as having some, not because we're a regulated utility market. So I think there might be something in the law that prevents, this outright purchase by a third party to sell it directly. I don't understand that whole process, but I think it needs to be explored.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the New England context, which is the one I'm most familiar with because that's who I represented, ISO New England, there were states that were basically subsidizing the renewable energy projects, and that created a general mess in terms of how the market works in the context of that, because those who are subsidized can underbid. And is that in the long-term interest of the energy diversity of the particular region? So there's, some interesting questions like, really what Eileen is, I think, pointing to to a large extent is, would Virginia subsidize? Well, it creates a lot of interesting throw off issues. So
Kathy, did you have a comment?
Good. As far as the outreach to, your military installations, and I know that, the military actually came in, the department, their Undersecretary of Energy came in and installed those solar panels on Oceana, which Oceana can't even use that power because of their grid system. But would it be a recommendation from VOWDA to include your Secretary of Military and Veterans Affairs to help with that outreach to military installations for there to be off takers?
I'll just jump in here. So Tom, if anyone knows Tom Krabs, he's with Secretary Crenshaw's team.
Yep. Mhm.
He's part of our cross coordination team, and he will be there next month. And so if we want to put that on the list of topics, and then back to the legislative questions is, we can also have the policy team talk through. I know the amendments and the bills were confusing for many that don't speak that language, which not many of us do, but we can also walk through that and kind of how we see it playing out in terms of the competitiveness working group.
Yeah, that's a great comment. So Tom Krabs, former Coastie, good friend of mine, and we're supposed to get together next week and talk offshore wind. So I'm excited that he's still participating, and I think he'll be a huge asset to kind of explore that option. But it's no secret, like I said, it's lots of folks in the room know. There's lots to always talk about with building a supply chain and jobs, and all that's fantastic. But it was no different than when I did kind of the same thing in the oil and gas world, which is you have to have offtake agreements. We got to sell power, right? We got to sell energy. And that's at the end of the day, that has to happen. That domino has to fall to get everything else. So I do think that there's a level of effort that is needed now from, whether it's VOWDA and other entities. We need to sell more power or see more power sold to drive project development, to drive the supply chain, to drive jobs. I mean, that's the dominoes. But I will not get on that.
Power, yeah,
on that
power
high
is a
horse.
big deal, both gas and electricity for your military installations. And every 2 years, the Secretary commissions a study called How to Keep and Grow the Military Mission in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think this year they're updating that study. It's the Roosevelt Group and the Matrix Design Group come in and do that. They interview stakeholders from your military installations, from businesses, the business community, from your municipalities, and come up with a report. And I think maybe it's important to talk to Tom about including this industry and workforce development, which was directly tied to our transitioning veterans to this report, and get it included in this report in some way.
Okay. So I'd offer, kind of back to the discussion on the way ahead for our work plan, and please disagree with me. Sounds to me like there's kind of three big items for us to that need some more attention. So Kathy's already spearheaded R&D, so that's one. PPAs, that's clearly something that needs to happen. And then I'd probably offer workforce as one that just needs to be further analyzed, because I hear two stories. I hear we're doing just fine, and I hear we're not. Okay, so from different groups. So I think that needs to be ironed out, so where everybody gets on the same page of whether there's a real workforce crisis or there's not. So, but I offer up for discussion, what do y'all think? Is that the right big three? Because quite frankly, site selection, project support, supply chain, I'm not worried about, because enough of that work is already underway that it's in a good place.
My input towards workforce is just, is the story being told well? And are we doing a good job as a state in cross-pollinating and making sure that we're not being duplicative? So is one educational institute covering something? Are they all covering the same three things, and then we're missing this gap of another type of training that needs to be done? So are we making sure that college A or a for-profit entity, are we making sure everybody has all the different stuff, especially because there's lots of money out there for grants to qualify for this. So, I mean, like, so let's just use TCC just and revealed their lab the other day. Chris and I were both there, and it's great. So it'd be nice to know that that's not being duplicated somewhere else, that we just have the ability to, within our own system, cover everything that's being done. So that may be part of that gap analysis, is just for the training part of it. I know we're worried about making sure we have the workforce and they're getting trained, but that's making sure we have what we together as a state to train them.
Yeah, I would just echo. I mean, that's an output that
Yeah.
we can manage, I think, and it's probably of tremendous value to the entire Commonwealth, because there is some overlap. And to Ashley's point, you know, some of the for-profit institutes providing some training, Vice, say at TCC and what they announced this past week, pretty special, and also reaching into the high schools and even from, you know, I think, Eileen, something that is, you know, I know of interest and to all of us, and something you're directly involved with, are some of these, you know, coastal underserved communities, and thinking about pathways to enter this offshore wind industry. And I think what TCC has put forth, for me, even the aha is they have VR classes that they know there's a percentage of folks who may be interested and may even have aptitude, but as soon as they realize there's the risk of having to climb 600 feet because they're going to, you know, that's real, right? The elevator doesn't work. You got to get down. I mean, that sounds silly, but it isn't, you know? And so TCC is really, I think, with help from Virginia Beach, been able to fund a laboratory to provide some of that initial screening and then ultimately what becomes training.
Well,
It's a
and there
good
was the Mid-Atlantic Training Alliance. So we probably should have, you know, where is that going? And are we adding to that? And how could we possibly influence that as well?
Yeah, because that was my point. So ODU's having a maritime symposium yesterday and today, and I was talking with one of our members who's over there that runs a training institution, right? And we had the discussion where some of my concerns sometimes is that we have overcapacity for training, because you have all of these groups, everyone and their mom wants to stand up an offshore wind training school.
Exactly.
And they all run out there and they do it. But then there's a concern of how many bodies is the industry actually going to need?
Mhm.
And then so what does that look like for butts and seats from a training standpoint? However, it was useful for me. He shared with me, yes, they have a training institute, you know, for instance, GWO training, but somehow by mandate, he can only put 8 bodies in a class at a time. So he's capped at 8, and then it's a 2-year life cycle on the certificate, right? So that was useful to say, okay, like there is, I think, even if there's a bunch of training schools, there could be some restraints. So what I'd like to do, since this is Eileen's favorite topic, Eileen, since you're the lead on the workforce piece, thoughts on putting together a deep dive similar to what Kathy did, kind of like, okay, here's the ecosystem, here's what's really out there, here's the real need, like you said, like kind of a gap analysis.
Absolutely.
And Howard, similarly, if you're willing to do that on the PPA side, and that you wouldn't be doing this alone. If you need support, obviously we can bring in people, and even I'll mention our public guests here who are also SMEs in the offshore wind space. I think there's lots of resources available to do that. So does that sound?
I think the first step, at least on this, on the PPA part, is probably participating in the next meeting of the coordination teams.
Okay.
Just to find out what's being done already.
Okay.
And, you know, in terms of who is at the table, who needs to be at the table for that to be successful. So I think that can form a base of the deep dive. I think you start from there before you just go off on your own.
Yep. Okay.
So
Just to add to that, all really great points, is we can make sure, Eileen, that we have Turner Widgeon and Will Arney, and then maybe even someone from like Virginia Beach Economic Development, you know, the tip of the spear, the folks that are talking every day to these companies that are overseas and are making decisions. Is it would be really good to understand, like, what are their concerns when it comes to a workforce perspective. And other things is we want to stay close to the industry and how they're making decisions.
Very good. Any thoughts on that, Eileen?
And just timeline, when were you thinking that?
Yes.
Deadline, I should say.
So I think, and this kind of bleeds into, I know we only do 4 meetings a year. I mean, I don't see anything in the bylaws that says we can't do more, but it would kind of be like teeing it up for presentations at the next VOWDA meeting.
June?
I think that's the next date.
Okay.
Well, when is our next meeting? I don't think it's June.
That's even an
Ken,
agenda item.
it's a Ken question.
July 13th.
July 13th. It'd be the rough timeline for maybe brief outs on the PPA work item, the workforce work item, similar to what Kathy did. If that sounds good.
Yeah.
I would ask though, Brian, any thoughts on anything? You're my one quiet guy today.
Yeah, I was just thinking from a workforce perspective, and we've been talking to Sean Avery and the Workforce Council. I know the Alliance. In fact, man, I think there's a forum or something this afternoon with the Alliance. Correct. Yes. To discuss the workforce gap analysis and those type of things. So I know there's a lot of work being done with the Workforce Council in this space. It might be worth maybe even bringing Sean in for an update on where we are with the development of a workforce to address the offshore wind industry.
And is it only Hampton Roads Workforce Council? Is other councils around the state doing it as well as part of?
Well, yeah, and I think that
Virginia.
that would feed into my thought where similar to what Kathy did, where Kathy went and reached out to a ton of different groups, consolidated it all and presented. So that could also be an option where you chat with the Alliance, you chat with Workforce Council.
Yeah.
Pull it all together.
Yeah.
It's like Michael Fegans in Virginia Beach. He's actually works with recruiting people to take to New College Institute. Veterans specifically. So there's a lot of people doing this.
There are
Yeah,
tons of
exactly. So,
people doing stuff.
yep, it's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's all good stuff. But the essence of the problems that I'm seeing so far are number one, coordination, understanding who's doing what and where, and then doing the gap analysis as for, what's not getting covered. And then the second one is there's a lot of great programs and a lot of people doing a lot of really great work, but and this may be due to the lack of coordination, but everything needs promotion. It needs to be promoted because you have these training opportunities, but if nobody finds out about them, they need to be promoted. So coordination and promotion.
And I will not take us down this rabbit hole too far, Will, I promise. Is I'm putting on my education hat, and I don't believe that John Q. Public and generally speaking, the residents of Virginia really understand offshore wind and what it means and how it works. We have not done a good job of that as a state. And I could maybe say as a nation, we haven't. So I spend a lot of my time when I'm trying to just share about our project, actually having to explain offshore wind in general for them to understand that part. So lots of different ways that we can be doing. So I'll drop it there, leave the bone live for now.
Well, it's energy, it's clean energy, promoting, combating climate change, and it's jobs, economic development. Those are the two win-wins for why we want offshore wind.
A win-win-win.
And I think it's astute, Brian. I mean, obviously Sean Avery and the Workforce Council, Hampton Roads Workforce Council are recipients of significant funding, right?
Yeah.
So you have but the funding piece is critical too. And so I don't know in great depth, but my inclination is there's a lot of good news to come from the Hampton Roads Workforce Council. So it'd be a good time to plug them in and they can share about what they're doing with that Good Job Challenge Award around maritime. And that's obviously the whole industry, but obviously wind plays a big part of that. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Marcia. That's good. All right, so this is what I'm going to recommend to keep kind of things rolling along. Kept track of a few things. So
One, provide feedback to Kathy on some R&D items. Like I said, do that. Reply to her email directly, and we'll make sure Al or Kathy feel free to share the most updated PowerPoint with the team. And then Howard's we're going to put him on the agenda for next meeting to give a brief out, at least some initial deep dive on PPAs. Same thing with Eileen and workforce. I got to touch base with Chelsea and the Virginia Energy team on what VOWDA participating in the next coordination team meeting looks like. And then we'll do some sort of tight presentation. Does that sound good? And I don't think, Al, I don't think any of this violates the FOIA public meeting concerns. Don't think.
It-
Don't want to crack that open, though.
Let's not correct that.
Okay. We'll make
Chelsea,
sure.
I have a question for Chelsea over that, over our timeline. Chelsea, do you have anything to add about our timeline and when maybe some of our recommendations that would include budget items or legislative actions would need to
That's a good
say,
point.
get to your group to find sponsors and create the correct language?
That is the best question. And I think we are going to start the process in June. And so one of the things that many of you know is that the governor and team are extremely data driven. Ryan was in a briefing with him yesterday. He can attest to this. I think that if there are recommendations for legislative changes, budget, the Power Innovation Fund is a good example of that. Essentially came to be because of data that the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium board came to us with, because they had already created essentially a strategic plan across the entire ecosystem. So it would be really great to start talking about this stuff in June and then continue refining kind of the information backing up the recommendations.
So maybe then we'll, when I get get people's questions, recommendations, everything, I can recompile some of the recommendations, prioritize them, because, some of this is, kind of low hanging fruit, kind of easy actions for us. Maybe we could, like Eileen said, is get some research topics and prioritize them, and maybe do that gap analysis again, like was, I don't know, was that you, Laura, said, and see where some of that can be accomplished by our collaborative partners, and where maybe we would look at a fund from the budget that VOWDA would manage, or find another entity to manage that. Again,
Got
just ideas of what, something fairly easy, but a actionable item to get completed by June.
No, I agree, and I think that's a good point, because and even when you brought up, so Open Seas and Aerial, I mean, they compete for and receive grant funding from various sources. So again, easy tools kind of that already exist that we could partner with, give them something to do. I know Jerry's always looking for something fun and interesting to do, solving sticky problems for all of those who know him. But same thing with the Alliance, Matt being the director of water and energy technology. Is that right? Close enough. I think we have, and that was my earlier point about one of the things that Virginia has a fantastic advantage of is we have all kinds of tools laying around right here, and groups, right? That can do great work. We just need to kind of harness that. Same thing with legislative stuff. I know that schedule is probably a little later than June. I will say, well, those of you who are tracking the governor's amendments from SB 1441 and HB 2444. They were passed by both the House and the Senate. So now the governor has 30 days essentially to veto or pass the original bill as amended as it came out of the chambers. So I think, and this will be my statement since this is a public meeting, I think there's plenty of appetite to revisit this topic next session. So I'll leave it there. And I think there's a lot of work to do on that front. Quick question, Eileen.
Yeah.
Quick.
Supply chain.
Yeah.
To get an update on all of the work that, because you said that you had that pretty well covered, but would love to just have a brief update at every VOWDA meeting as to where we are with.
Okay, yeah, we can figure that out, because, and we'll kind of want to clarify my earlier comment. I think we could do that in a tight way, but we meet so infrequently that I want to make sure that when we do meet, we're like really doing stuff, because I think most of us, including yourself, are pretty locked in with what's going on, but maybe we can try to refine where we're not locked in and look for,
I'm
like-
not locked in on supply chain.
gotcha.
That's all
Okay.
new for me.
figure it out. Matt's gonna handle that. But we'll make sure we look for like meaningful updates between, I think, the times when we met last and the time before. Okay. Any other comments on our work plan way ahead? Questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. We don't have anyone signed up for public comment, so that's going to save us a few minutes. Is there any other business or closing remarks by board members? I know that Ashley had a quick announcement she wanted to give.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just to bring everyone up to speed specifically on the Kitty Hawk project. One of our next steps is actually we have the transmission corridor proposed, and we have the rights of way all taken care of to go and get the cables, the power to our substation and corporate landing in Virginia Beach. We have everything out in the water. Now what we have to do is plug the two together. And so the next step for us is to get easements granted in a parking lot in Sandbridge that is owned by the city of Virginia Beach. And so that is upcoming. So on May the 4th, there is a community input briefing and input where my team will go and present on our project. It is at 6:30 at the Virginia Beach City Council. And that'll give us a chance to update the public and receive more input. Then hopefully from there, we'll go to an official public hearing by the city of Virginia Beach, where then they will then hopefully officially put it onto the docket to be voted upon to approve that grant, those easements. So anyone who is willing to write a letter or anything else to help support that, please let me know. I'd be happy to help coordinate that with you. But that's the next step to make sure that Virginia has a second offshore wind project that can bring the power ashore, bring new industries, bring new companies. Be great. Good stuff. So thank you, Will, for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashley. And
PSA.
I'll let y'all know that as a citizen of Virginia Beach, I will be commenting or showing up to support the project. Because again, so I encourage, if you happen to be a citizen of Virginia Beach and you just want to wear your citizen hat, feel free to connect with Ashley as we tee up, both in basically providing feedback at the public meeting and then also the city council meeting that would follow. And then there's a good team kind of strategizing that. Any other business comments? Al did mention, and I think it's worth spending a minute or two talking about IPF. I thought was fantastic. We always have good reception every time we do kind of the Virginia team. I know Matt usually bears the brunt of coordinating all that, so I do appreciate Matt and his leadership in that regard. And I think we're going to have a hot wash at some point. I think Matt's looking to schedule that where we can get together and look over.
Yeah, I believe Ryan had a questionnaire.
Yeah, I'll be sending out a follow-up questionnaire form that you filled out about what worked but didn't, what you saw that you liked at other booths, what you saw that we should definitely avoid, what we can do better for next year. That's to be out soon.
Can I just throw something out there for maybe, if we could even prepare this before the May meeting? And Chris, we kind of talked about this on the coordination call, but the event that Virginia Beach had before the IPF conference was fantastic. And not to mention, right, it helps our tourism economy. But if we talk, wearing my tourism hat, but if we could be thoughtful about the opportunity to host something like that from a Commonwealth's perspective, and even, BDP was involved with Virginia Beach. It could be Virginia Beach led again, but I thought that was a great event. And if that's something that we could be more holistic and thinking and strategic, and maybe, make it an annual thing, or I don't know. I mean, you all know better than I do, but I think a lot of the supply chain questions and the competing to win questions, and Chris, you might want to jump in here.
So if I can, Secretary Jenkins, I'm gonna jump. It's Ashley. Is back in 2021 or 2021, the Hampton Roads Alliance actually hosted a very similar thing here in the whole region, because the conference was in Richmond. So that has historically been done. And so, but I totally agree with you that it would be great to do it on a statewide level. So, just so you know, it was a little bit bigger in 21, just an FYI. So,
Got it.
but I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some momentum there and there's intentionality where in fact, if we're working with all stakeholders and trying to target certain supply chain, I would say opportunities that we know are in the pipeline, it could be even if somewhat off cycle, these type of we'll call red carpet events are historically the VEDP and HRA have been, participants and funding, and I think it would be worthwhile, especially we look at, some upcoming milestones here in Virginia, especially, and I'll put my Virginia Port Authority hat on. I mean, with PMT well under construction and coming into some milestones here in the summer, early fall, seeing monopiles on the deck at PMT
Like, yeah.
is pretty special, and that's what will happen. And so, that's, I think, again, showing the global industry of offshore wind that Virginia is serious and actually doing something to support this.
So for
deployment.
Kathy and Howard and Laura, if you didn't know, and I think Eileen knew, but so the city of Virginia Beach brought in a lot of the internationals that they've been visiting, and they did it the weekend prior to the Be Now conference in Baltimore. And so that morning they had us all at tables. I was able to present on Kitty Hawk. GT was there to present on the CVOW project, and we were able to have all those kind of great meetings. And there was a reception that evening. So, but that's just a quick down and dirty since you weren't there, let you know what's happening.
Thanks.
Yeah, being that the next IPF is in New Orleans, so that might be a little
Oh,
bit of
yeah.
a logistical challenge, but if
We'll put them on
the
the bus.
powers that be want to spend the money and do it,
There you go.
let's see, that trip is about 20 hours. We do a 20-hour bus ride or some cheap flights on
Brian, I think
Breeze.
there's probably a place the chamber could have a stop in the middle on the way.
That's true.
Good stuff.
Okay.
New Orleans was actually our first leadership exchange.
I think I do remember that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
All right, so hearing no other comments, my only closing remark I'll offer is I think this was very productive meeting, and hopefully you guys feel the same way. We got some things to work on so that we can continue to provide value as we were chartered to do. I thank you all for participating in this, and we can go from there. Next meeting dates, I think we had mentioned, Ryan, was July-ish.
July 13th, September 14th, and December 7th.
Okay, cool. We
And
have
you
three
put
more.
calendar invites for all those after.
great.
Yeah, so thank you.
Having the rest of them here, splitting them here in Richmond, or having the next three here and the final December meeting.
Right. And they can be you can have two virtual a year, just not back to back.
Interesting.
That is an option.
Yeah, I know. I think one of them we're supposed to have in Richmond. I think that's the December annual
December
meeting.
one.
I'm not going to say I'm agnostic because I'm not. I do just keep in mind, the makeup of our board. And yes, I will not be shy that the majority of the board is in the Hampton Roads region. So I would lean more in that direction, but I know that in the past we've gone back and forth between Richmond and here. So that's that. We can sort that out later. Okay.
But thank you again for doing those calendar invites, just to have them already on our calendar is really super nice.
And I believe the coordination call meeting is the 9th.
May 9th.
Yes, the second Tuesday.
May 9th.
I think there'll be an adjustment. Sounds like, and I will speak, I think we'll be adjusting the time range and
It'll be
location.
whether the start time is still 10, but it'll be somewhere around that date and somewhere around that time.
No, it wasn't.
I'll provide further details.
And maybe that's something that if
LCI need to coordinate on.
yeah, and I'm gonna actually ask my buddy Chris as my vice chair, if he can kind of work on that so that we really getting clear on what do they want us to present on, how long do we have, who do they want to come up, et cetera. Okay. Well, hearing nothing else, thank you to everybody online. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Jenkins, for coming, and all our guests. It's good to see Laura and Kathy as well. And we will consider this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.